APIA Nevada is a grassroots nonprofit organization that advocates for policies empowering everyday Asian Pacific Islander Nevadans. Nevada is home to a growing APIA community, accounting for 1 in 10 voters. We are One APIA Nevada. Tonight's episode of Out in Front is brought to you by our season sponsors, Nevada State Education Association, One APIA Nevada, Silver State Voices, and Stefan and Marta Schmidt.
Belina, I hope that everyone is having a fantastic Friday Eve. My name is Mathilda Guerrero, and I'm with the Battleborn Progress team. Tonight, I have the absolute honor of hosting this amazing panel of Out in Front with Battleborn Progress. We have a special treat for you as we honor Asian American, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Heritage Month in style. The theme for this year's AANHPI Heritage Month is Advancing Leaders Through Opportunities. And we have an incredible panel lined up for you all. But before we dive in, let me tell you something about this panel. Our panelists tonight hold a very special place in my heart. They are some of my most favorite people on this planet and who every day are breaking barriers and building leaders. So without further ado, please join me in rolling out the virtual red carpet for our dazzling speakers tonight. We have the incomparable Nevada State Assemblywoman, Erica Mosca, whose dedication to public service and uplifting the East Side students, myself included, straight from the halls of Daniel Goldfarb Elementary School, and leaders in training is truly inspiring. Needless to say, the Assemblywoman is a trailblazer in her own right. Joining her is the amazing force of nature and my very good friend, Angeline Tababa, who is the president and chair of the AAPI Democratic Caucus of Southern Nevada, who's leading the charge to uplift AANHPI voices in the Silver State. Last but not least, we have the GOAT himself. If you know, you know. The interim executive director of One APIA Nevada, Eric Lester Jang, whose passion for empowering the AANHPI community is second to none. Together, they are ready to ignite your thoughts and stimulate a very thought-provoking conversation that's definitely going to leave you all inspired. This show hasn't officially started all the way yet, but in our interim conversation, I was definitely left inspired. So I'm excited for you all to feel the same thing. But hey, we also want to hear from folks back home. So if you're enjoying the show, if you have any burning questions for our all-star panel, don't forget to drop them in the chat. So sit back, relax, and get ready for an engaging and empowering discussion as we celebrate AANHPI Heritage Month tonight, tomorrow, and every day. So the first person I want to bring in is the Assemblywoman. Assemblywoman Mosca, I'm really interested to know what inspired you to become the chair of the AANHPI caucus. And I'm sure with every new adventure, there's always some challenges and, of course, always some new opportunities. Can you talk to us about your experience and what that's been like for you?
Thank you so much, Matilda. And I want to first thank you for that so nice and touching introduction. So I just really appreciate you. And I am equally, if not more, honored to be on this panel with everyone here today. So thank you for having us. And so I think it's really important, one, that I didn't think that I would be the AANHPI caucus chair right at the beginning of session. So I'm a freshman legislator. I'm learning so much. And I think, one, I was kind of voluntold, right? That's the best thing that happens to all of us. I did, like you said, I had started a nonprofit. I'm pretty good at organization and synergy and agendas. And because I was a teacher, I care really about being on time. So I think I got like all the mechanics of running a meeting down. So they wanted me to do that. But I also think it's really interesting as a freshman, I actually have more time to do things like run our caucus because I don't have other roles within the organization. So I thought that was really interesting. And I would say, I wouldn't say a challenge, but something that's been really interesting is there's 7 of us. We are very diverse. We represent diverse constituency groups, diverse heritages, we're diverse in age, we're diverse in gender, we're just really diverse. And so in some ways, I think it's natural we don't always agree on everything, but I think it's because we bring everybody's unique perspective to the table. And so for this session, we're not specifically championing legislation, but we all have agreed on the idea of language access. So we all know, all seven of us believe in the idea of ensuring access and equitability when it comes to languages. And so I think it's just been really fun to get to know everyone as people and ensure that there is something that binds us together, which this session has been language access support.
You know, Assemblywoman, you just spoke my love language, combining forces, finding ways to corral around one shared idea, and of course, language access. That's definitely something that we've had very long conversations about, not just in this political and not just in our professional capacities, but I'm sure in all of our personal capacities. Um, Assemblywoman, I want to talk to you about something very, very near and dear to me. So tonight's episode is about breaking barriers and building leaders. And of course, tonight's panel consists of folks who have shattered glass ceilings, defied every single odd against them, and blazed a new trail for others to follow. So with that being said, you are the first Filipino legislator in the Silver State. What has your experience been breaking barriers in the political space, and how do you hope to inspire other women and other folks who belong to underrepresented and underserved communities to follow in your footsteps?
Thank you. The first thing I always say is that I may be the first Filipina, but I for sure will not be the last. And that really is the focus and focal point of my whole point of being up here. You know, I grew up low income, not in Nevada, but I grew up with a father who's an immigrant. He came from the Philippines. He didn't speak the language. He earned his GED, and he still works nights today in Las Vegas. And him and my mom got married at a young age. You know, she had me before she was 21, and we moved around a lot, but we always had love. My family always talked about the importance of education and being proud of who you are as well as your identity, but knowing that, yeah, we're always going to have to work twice as hard or three times as hard, but that's okay. I like to call it, you know, a beautiful burden. I represent more than just myself. I even if I don't think I do, I represent a lot of people, and that's important. So in some ways, I always say I'm older than I look, I think at least. And so I still get the question. I have definitely, you know, had microaggressions where people don't think I'm a legislator just because maybe I don't typically look like the standard of what a legislator is. And I think the more of us who come up here and can show, and we have one of the most diverse legislatures, right? So we're very lucky for that. But I think for me, it's just really important that I, one, proudly represent my community and culture. Two, also acknowledge that I'm not just here because of me. There are many, many people who had to break down each and every door before I could even be up here. And third, that it is my responsibility to ensure that others can. So, you know, what are some examples? I think is bringing regular people up to session. That has been a thing that I'm really care about and passionate about, helping people understand how to testify, which you all do such an amazing job at too. And, you know, communicating with constituents still. So even though I'm up here, I like to, you know, on a pretty fairly regular basis, communicate with people about what's going on, not assuming that they know we live in a bubble, and just making it accessible for people so that they can see my example, but then they can start paving their example even earlier. Because when I was your age, I didn't ever think I could be a legislator. And now, you know, we know that it's possible. So I can't wait for more people to come up here even quicker.
I love the way that you think. First and definitely not the last. I love that. So another question that I have for you, Assemblywoman, we're talking about bringing folks up there, reminding them that the legislature is your house. This is the people's house, and the folks that are in these seats work for you. So speaking of that, during the Assembly 241 hearings, I loved hearing so many students, whether it was in person in Grant Sawyer in Carson City, or folks who called in and talk about their stories and to share why they believe that the state should make make the important strides to do forward with equitable access to higher standards of education for all students. So can you talk to us about Assembly Bill 241, Assembly Bill 251, and the other amazing bills that you're working on this session?
Yes, thank you. So Assembly Bill 241, I'm really excited and proud about that. And I think so many people, like you said, have experienced this. I experienced tracking in school. So that meant I went to 7 different schools growing up. And when I was in the 7th grade, they didn't put me on the accelerated track for whatever reason. And it took a teacher who said, hey, she has great grades. Why would she not be on this track? Which we know in middle school, that track puts you into honors and AP and gets people to talk to you about college. I do not believe that college is the only way to be successful, but I believe that every young person should have access to it. And so AB 241 says we should put all students on the college and career readiness track. That means that's not just college track, it includes our trade school track as well. So if young people want to take career and technical education courses, but we just know if you go to a certain school in a certain neighborhood and you make a certain amount of income, we see all the stats that you are probably not going to be put into a higher level course, even if you wanted it. And so many young people testified about they didn't even know their options. And so that bill does not say everyone has to graduate on that diploma, which I think is really important. I think I consider myself pretty pragmatic. I like to use the term, pragmatic progressive. And so I want young people to have access, but I'm not trying to say they must graduate on it. So what we're doing is making the highest level diploma, because you can take a standard diploma, you can take an advanced diploma, or you can take the college and career readiness. We're saying that all students should automatically be put on that track, but if they don't want to do it, they can opt out. So just trying to change it that everyone has access, but still allowing for choice. AB 251 just as language access for prescription drugs. I think that's very important, making sure we put the top 10 languages on the labels of our medications. So that one, our entire caucus has supported and our co-sponsors. And I think my third one, really briefly, I would say is also an education one. I really use my experience on the ground to come up with legislation. So all my legislation has been stuff I've experienced as someone working on the ground in the education field, especially in East Las Vegas. We have a lot of students who they owe $150, $200 to their institution because they have a parking ticket or they withdrew from their class. If you owe over $100 at an entry institution, you can't access your transcripts. And we know you need your transcript to transfer, to get a job. So we know that inequitably impacts our most marginalized youth. So I have a bill to make that illegal, that we must give transcripts. But again, young people have to pay that back eventually. They shouldn't have to make the first payment. They should get the transcript. They should not be charged extra fees because we know the institutions need that money. But we cannot put barriers for young people just because our institutions need that. So hopefully that made sense.
No, it does. I think that makes perfect sense. I'm just going to say this from my own point of privilege. At the end of this month, I'm going to be graduating with my graduate degree from Purdue University, and I'm in like a little chat with some of my friends who are saying, "Well, oh no, I have like all of these extra fees that I have to process, so now I won't be able to graduate in time." So I see how this is such a big encapsulating issue, and I'm so glad to see that the Silver State is making the advancements to making sure that we're giving our students the opportunity to thrive and not have something holding them back. Uh, Before we get into the audience questions, I would like to know, Assemblywoman, what advice would you give to young folks who are interested in pursuing a career in politics, and how can they get involved in their communities and make a positive impact?
I just love that question. And I think it's important because if we can't see it, we can't be it, right? And so I think something I've learned in all my 15 years of work in education is this idea of social capital. If you know someone that can expose you to a job, if they can expose you to an internship, paid or unpaid, if they can make sure you're part of the conversation, that you know what it's like to be at the table, not always be the one who's only canvassing and knocking on doors in the 100-degree heat. But then, okay, if you canvass, then how about you come to this conversation or practice this donor meeting and give you some leadership so you're actually taking something away instead of just, being used for something like canvassing. And so for me, I just think it's really important. Growing up, I always say Barbie didn't look like me. There were no actresses. There were no TV shows back then. where I saw Filipinx people on TV, right? So I didn't know I was going to be a legislator. I didn't even know what a legislator was. We were just trying to make sure there was food at the table, that we weren't being evicted, that we could survive. But I know that that's what my parents wanted for me. You know, they came here so that the next generation could have that opportunity. So it's on me to ensure I never forget where I come from. Again, I moved to Las Vegas right after college. I went to college in Boston, moved to East Las Vegas to become a teacher. I've lived in East Las Vegas since 2008. And I think I always say, except the 1 year I met my husband and then made him move to the east side. But during that whole time, it's how I remember who I am. Like I can go to Summerlin, I can go to wherever, and I can have a board meeting with people who don't look like me, and I can speak that language. But when I go home, where my parents live 5 minutes away from me, where the community is more like how I grew up, that's how I remember, hey, I have this opportunity and privilege. If in the community I go home to every night doesn't have these opportunities, it's my job to make sure we're building that so everyone can have access.
You are speaking to the choir here. I definitely understand exactly what you're saying, and I could see it blowing up in our chat right now. So folks at home have lots of interesting questions that they want to ask you. They want to speak to you directly. They're interested in knowing. So what recommendations do you have for someone who wants to run for the first time? And I know that you briefly talked about this and how you didn't know that you were going to become a legislator, but how did you decide that this is exactly what my calling is, and this is how I want to do this? This is how I want to make the change.
That's such an important question because I think sometimes we always don't talk about when things don't work out. So a lot of people forget I actually ran for office in 2016, lived in another area, still in East Las Vegas, just I was just like 1 mile over is a different district, right? But I did run in 2016 and I lost. And I ran as someone who really cared about my issues. I was really embedded in my community, but I did not know there was this whole system, right? We know when we are people just trying to survive or help our community, we don't know about lobbyists and maybe how Carson City works, or how the state party versus the county party versus the local precinct works. But I just knew that I wanted to stop complaining, and that if I was so upset about things, I had to put my money where my mouth is and just try. And so I ran in 2016 unsuccessfully. I would never take that back because I learned so much. So by doing that, that's how then I learned about things like Emerge Nevada, and then applied for Emerge and then got interested in that way. And so I think it's just important. One, don't be afraid if it doesn't work out. You have to try somehow, right? So I think if you're interested in running for office, there are now so many organizations or groups or people you can really connect to. I think a lot of people, especially from our shared background, are very scared about fundraising. I'll help you with that, right? Anyone needs help with that. But because my whole work has been in nonprofits, fundraising, now I just see it as how can I help my community give $5 or $10 and then use that as power, right? So if you can ask 1,000 people for $5, right? You're actually giving those 1,000 people a voice that they wouldn't have had anyway. So I think fundraising is really just about mindset. And then thirdly, I would say get involved now, whether it's being an attache, work at one of the, groups like Battleborn Progress, just so you can learn how it works, but don't be afraid to get started and don't be afraid of failing because the potential is limitless. And I never thought, right, after losing that this is where I would be. But if you just keep doing the work in the community, it somehow works out.
And then another burning question that folks are having for you. So, Assemblywoman, I know that it's almost sine die. So, folks at home are wondering, what are you looking forward to as soon as this session wraps up?
Oh, okay. So I think another thing that we hear a lot, and I think it's important to acknowledge, is that it is a sacrifice to be up here. I think of it more as public service, which I think a lot of us do. But I don't see my partner regularly. He's down south. It's hard. It's expensive to fly up, fly down. We don't have any children. So I have my border collie mix named Panda that we got from the shelter, and so I miss him. But I think personally, honestly, I'm excited because I think I'm a policy nerd, a policy wonk, like so many of us on this call. I want to see how does it actually work. So, my perspective as a legislator is I've been doing this work for so long. So that transcript bill, AB 212, I knew that it was a problem because my nonprofit would pay for that fee so my students could get their transcript and they could transfer. So if I knew that was a problem and I couldn't solve it as a nonprofit. I could solve it for my students, but I know other students have that problem. I wanted to run because I wanted to see, can we solve these problems at scale? Now I have a bill that has unanimously gone through the assembly. I had my Senate hearing. Hopefully and it went unanimous in work session. So hopefully it will be voted in the Senate. Hopefully it will be signed on. It is my job. So what am I excited for in the interim? To see if that worked, right? Because if we just think we're here for 120 days and we don't go back to to the practitioners or the implementation to see did this bill actually have that intended effect, then I think we're doing a disservice. So I'm really excited to see if the things that I ran for and came up here to work on are now going to help people in their real lives, because we know that's why we're here. That's the most important thing of being an elected official.
Thank you so much for sharing those words. You know what? Like, since knowing the Assemblywoman, I feel like I've definitely learned a lot, and I've definitely seen exactly what it means to continue moving forward and trying new things and just expanding onto that. So thank you so much for joining us in tonight's show. Uh, Folks back home, don't forget to drop in the chat your favorite Assemblywoman Moscow quote. Mine is first, but definitely not the last. Drop your favorite quote in there, and don't forget to use the hashtag out in front with BBP. So now I'm going to turn it over to my friend Angeline. So, how do you see the role of the AAPI community in shaping the future of politics in the Silver State? And what are some key issues and concerns that our community is focused on today?
Thanks, Matilda. And again, thanks so much for having me on. I'm Angeline. I'm the chair of the AAPI Democratic Caucus. It's a great question. And I think we can say that our AAPI community has already impacted and shaped Nevada politics. Now, we're a state, and in our state and honestly throughout the nation, our AANHPI community is our fastest growing population. We already make up 10% of our state's electorate and 12% of our state's population. So for us, that means that we have the power to shape and influence elections down the ticket. And the growth of our community also led to the growth of legislative representation. And we're so proud to be joined by Assemblywoman Erica Mosca today. We have a strong AANHPI legislative caucus made of AANHPI Democrats at the state level with 7 members. And we are so proud to also see the election of our first Filipina in our state legislature. And with this growing body of legislators, we're bound to inspire a new generation of leaders who understand how important it is to see yourself in office. And it's important to also reflect the diversity of Nevada. In addition to that, reflect the diversity of our AANHPI communities as well. And so I want to say we've already made some headway in Nevada, but that's not the same for across the country. And so AANHPIs are actually one of the most underrepresented groups in office across the nation. Right now, AANHPIs make up less than 1% of elected officials in the US. We actually make up 0.9% of elected officials in the US. So despite our population being over 6% of the population, we still just make up less than 1% of those elected in office. So it's important that AANHPI voters see a more reflective leadership, so we understand that our representative democracy includes and works for our best interests and ensures that our needs, especially in the most vulnerable populations, are addressed with a cultural understanding and in the languages that we're proficient in. I think to your second part of the questions about the key issues that our community cares about, I think one of those most important things is access to quality and affordable healthcare. And for our communities are at higher risk of cancer, of heart disease, of stroke, of hepatitis B, of HIV and AIDS, tuberculosis, and liver disease. And unfortunately, contrary to popular belief, we can't solve everything with Vicks. Nevada ranks 45th in our entire country with for the number of doctors, and we only have just over 200 active physicians for every 100,000 residents that we have. And we rank even lower for the number of primary care physicians in our state. We're actually 48th in our state. And then for general surgeons, Nevada is actually 49th in our state. So what makes this worse, in addition to the lack of available healthcare professionals in our state, is the number of uninsured Nevadans that are AANHPI. So according to the U.S. Office of Minority Health, about 6.6% of Asian Americans and about 9.1% of Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders are uninsured, compared to just about 6.3% of non-Hispanic and white people. AANHPIs don't have a great track record of reaching out for help either. So it's a combination of things like this that make healthcare hard for us to navigate. Infrequent medical visits in our communities, the language and the cultural barriers that we face, the lack of health insurance, all contribute to the high prevalence among these groups. And so I also want to talk a little bit just about mental health care, because I think that's critical too. Yesterday, we celebrated the third AANHPI Mental Health Day. API Dems was really excited that we could have joined over 75 organizations to help raise awareness about the challenges of our community when it comes to mental health care. Now, according to some data that was collected by SAMHSA, Asian Americans and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders have the lowest help-seeking rate of any racial and ethnic group. Only 25.4% of AANHPI adults with a mental illness received treatment in 2021. And even though suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the US, for our community, and specifically for youth in our community, ages 10 to 24, it is the #1 leading cause of death. So there's a lot of critical conversations we need to have in our own community about AANHPI mental health help. And we know that the COVID-19 pandemic only had exacerbated some of these problems, as increased racial violence and discrimination against our community was rampant, and we were disconnected a lot from our community. So a lot of things that we need to work on together.
You know, you said something that really resonated with me and actually reminded me of something that my mom used to say to me all the time, especially when I was a kid. She said something, she would always say that, hey, Matilda, I know that sometimes like you're gonna see a lot of things and there's gonna be people who don't look like you in positions where you want to be. And I know that it's going to be hard, and it's going to be hard to see people who don't look like us in those positions, but that's why we do these things. We're standing on the backs of the folks who brought us here, the backs of our ancestors, the folks who came before us, and they're opening new doors so that way we can keep opening new doors for the folks who come before us. So I really do appreciate you in that very thorough explanation. It's also very important that we are addressing the mental health crisis, especially with the impacts of the pandemic in itself, and just the onset of this is just something. It's healthcare, and it's something that we need to address, and it's something that we need to give the respect and time that it deserves. With that being said, you also talked about how the fact that our community is growing, but unfortunately, we do only represent a small portion of the voting bloc, but we still are one of the very fastest growing voting bloc. So what are some techniques and challenges and opportunities that AANHPI communities face in the Silver State? And how is the AAPI Dems working towards addressing these challenges and maximizing the opportunities to engage more voters, specifically our community?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I'm glad to get to talk about this. I want to talk about some of the challenges and then some progress that's already being made by our own community, because I think it's important that we continue to support AANHPI-driven solutions. So the stigma around mental and physical health, we talked about our community members are not the best at reaching out for help, and that's for so many reasons. So for AANHPI communities, again, it's challenges around financial, physical, communication, and cultural attitudes that make it difficult for our community to get the help that we need. But I want to say we are proud to have seen the opening of HAPPI by the Asian Community Development Council. It's a medical center that's seeking to bridge the gaps that we just talked about. And I think it's great that, again, this is a gap that's being recognized by our community, and the solution is being created and maintained and developed by our community to specifically address those who are uninsured, those who might face language barriers, and other issues, and especially even cultural competencies that the professionals at the Happy Medical Center can help do. One of the other things is language access. I think that is something that plagues our community. Tagalog, Filipino dialect, is the third most spoken language in Clark County. So we need to recognize that we need to continue to get more materials, especially when it comes to expanding our democracy and expanding access to a ballot box, to include Tagalog as the language to get our materials in. And I also want to recognize there is progress being made in expanding language access at the ballot box this legislative session. AB 246, which is sponsored by Assemblywoman Selena Torres, a member of the AANHPI caucus. This is going to enable Nevadans to vote and be provided with voter education materials and resources in their language of preference based on their county and state population requirements in Spanish, Tagalog, Mandarin, Shoshone. So these are resources and opportunities that's going to include sample ballots, mail-in ballots, in-person voting materials, and audio is going to be available to their families in those languages as well. And I wanted to say, expanding language access in these voting materials really does change lives. I want to talk about a personal anecdote. My mom voted for the very first time in the last cycle. She lives in Hawaii. She voted for the very first time because she realized that she could actually get her ballot in Ilocano, which is a Filipino dialect that she speaks. And she's from the Ilocos Norte region of the Philippines, and she never knew this entire time that you can actually get your ballot in Ilocano, which is a very specific dialect. And maybe that's the next step for us here in Nevada as we continue to expand language access, but it really does change lives. One of the other things I really want to talk about is data and data disaggregation. So passionate about this because a lot of times AANHPIs are left out of focus groups, we're left out of surveys. And when this happens, then data gets generalized on behalf of our communities, and specifically communities of color. Articles come out about how communities of color feel about a specific issue, or how just Asians feel about a specific issues, forgetting that Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders are part of that group too. And data disaggregation, first of all, just making sure that we get the data itself. We have groups like AAPI Data that is doing the work, but we need to continue to have mainstream media who begin these surveys to include AANHPIs in those surveys to begin with. And then we also get the data disaggregation, which allows us to separate information in smaller groups so that we can help identify underlying trends and patterns. And so again, we often get clumped together as Asians feel this way on one subject, and forgetting that we have Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders that need to be part of that. And even in our Asian group alone, there are several subgroups of our Asian community who needs data, whose data is different in their communities too. That's why data disaggregation is important. I think the better data that we have, the smarter our response will be when we try to develop plans to help serve our communities.
Wow, I love the way that you mentioned that. And I really do appreciate you mentioning the amazing anecdote with your mom. I'm so happy that she was able to cast her ballot for the very first time. My family is also from the Ilocos Norte region, and sometimes there's conversations between what's the difference between Ilocano and Tagalog. Isn't it the same thing? No, it's not. So thank you for putting that straight. I'd love to ask though, what are some of the most effective strategies and tactics for engaging AANHPI voters and increasing voter turnout? And how are you all working to implement these approaches in your outreach efforts?
I love this question. I think AAPI Dems wants to play a different type of role when it comes to approaching AANHPI members of our community and their involvement in politics. I think first and foremost, it's about creating and building a cohesive community that is bonded by the shared values of accessibility, bonded by equity, and bonded by empowerment for and by our own communities. And sometimes we always think about it's not always the politics, it's not always the support for a specific bill. These things can be very intimidating for members of our community who have never been involved in politics, who spend maybe 10 minutes a year reading about political articles or about politics in general. And so all of this can be intimidating for them, and learning about new issues can be intimidating for them. And so for us, we're focused on reframing how we talk about and approach politics. Politics affects our everyday lives, but when folks hear different terms like the governorship or Democrats versus Republicans, their stance on abortion, that can be confusing for folks. And so we want to reframe how we talk about politics for our communities to be more representative of government. So we let folks know, we remind folks, again, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, and talking about representation matters. Again, for us, we at the AAPI Democratic Caucus, we talk about creating a ladder of engagement. And so we start with a very base level, types of events that will get community members out by first a shared common value, like the celebration of AANHPI Heritage Month or the celebration of Chinese New Year, something cultural that bonds us together, and other things like food that just bonds us together, where we get to also learn about our community. And in that space, we let folks know an election is coming up. And from there, we build a ladder of engagement that looks like people vote, and then people register other folks to vote, help volunteer on a campaign, get other people to volunteer a campaign or work as a poll observer, and then they can hopefully work on a campaign themselves, be a poll worker, up to the ladder of engagement to managing a campaign, and hopefully run for office in the future, like we've seen with Assemblywoman Erica Mosca tonight. So this work is going to take several electoral cycles to do, and it's not something that happens overnight. But it will require us to be bold, it will require us to be patient, and it's going to require us to be intentional about this work and the people that we serve.
Yeah, I love everything that you just said. I wish that, well, this is recording, so I'm just going to go back later on at the end of this and just replay it because I love that. So I do have some questions for you. I have one more question before we turn into some audience questions for you. So what are some of the most exciting projects or initiatives that you all are currently working on, and how can folks get involved and support your work?
Thank you. Well, the AAPI Democratic Caucus programs monthly, meaning we host events every month to get our community together. So please become a member, follow us at AAPI Dems NB, follow our Twitter, click on our link tree, sign up to become a member, and get plugged into our events very quickly. We have an event happening tomorrow evening called Curry and Calligraphy, where we're going to celebrate the AANHPI community. And we recognize that curry is seems like a cross-cultural, multicultural type of dish. And we're going to try to share our different stories through something that bonds us together, like food. Something that we were proud to participate in with the help of the One API Nevada was a NHPI Lobby Day, where we got to talk to our legislators about issues that impacted our community. Over 100 folks came out to celebrate, talk about our culture and what bills were important to us. But we're also preparing for mobilization starting this year for the presidential election, because we know that work starts now. It starts with the work that we do in 2023. And if you are thinking about getting involved, now is the time to do it. Every election is the most important election of our lives, and that still remains true. This upcoming election is no different. So much is at stake when we talk about reproductive justice, preserving our environment, ensuring history, racism, racial justice is not erased in our school curriculum, protecting our libraries, so much more. So urge you all to become a member, get involved, join our movement, and come continue to program with us, and let us know how we can continue to reach more members of our AANHPI communities.
In my opinion, I think you all and our friends at One APIA and ACDC have some of the most amazing events. Personally, one of my favorite ones that you all have hosted is the Olympia and Legislation. That one holds a very special place in my heart, not just because there was also some Taylor Swift involved there too. You know, we do love them Swifties up in here. So our chat is blowing up for questions for you. We have lots of questions for you, actually. So the first question that folks back home would like to know is, what barriers have you seen for folks who want to get involved in the political process, especially for folks who look like you and I, and how can we mitigate those things, and how can we empower them?
That's a good question. And one of the things I had thought about when I became chair of the API Democratic Caucus is how could we get more young people involved? I think the barriers for young people in getting involved were pretty high. That considering prior to the presence of our board, everybody on the board was over 50 years old, which made it hard for youth voices to stand out because there were no young people leading. And now we have a board where everybody is under 35, which is very exciting. And so now it's a lot of young people taking the mantle. I think I think having young people on our team has definitely expanded the reach of our community. I think there needs to be an organization that's on the ground talking to young people all the time, because these are the people who can act quickly, are very flexible, have different ideas and solutions of how to get different communities engaged. I think some of the challenges today might be intergenerational communication. And so that's why we are making sure we focus our program around culture, because it's something that brings different generations of our community together, especially, again, talking about currying calligraphy and the celebration of AANHPI Heritage Month. We've also hosted, Mathilda, you talked about some of our programming. We've hosted a Dems and Dogs social where folks can come out with their dogs and learn a little bit about democratic politics. We've hosted a good number of karaoke events, because if you're going to organize hard, you also have to celebrate hard too. But we also have a number of educational opportunities where we wrap in lumpia and legislation and that on play, and get to socialize and network with people from our community while we learn about the progress being made by some of our own AANHPI leaders.
Wow, our chat is really loving you. They have lots of questions for you. So what folks want to know is, have you seen an increase in engagement post the pandemic, or has it been more challenging to get folks involved?
I will say that the pandemic was extremely challenging for our community. It was hard for our community when we needed to transition from an in-person space to an online space. Our community thrived when we were in the same physical spaces together. Some folks here know, but in our communities, we might not be the best by using our words and communicating with words. So we communicated with food. And so we needed to be in those same spaces together. So the transition at first, on the first year, was really difficult, and we had to transition to virtual programming. But again, I think that's also where we saw a lot of young people start to thrive, because they could be individuals who are flexible and knew how to use online platforms, also help older generations do the same. So that is something that we noticed in the pandemic. And I think obviously during the pandemic was the rise of anti-Asian violence, something that we needed to continue to check in with our communities. We saw increased engagement again from young people. I think this up and coming generation have such enthusiasm for checking on their friends and families, and the decreasing stigma around mental health in our communities is really showing up now, and especially during the pandemic. And there were a lot of communities, organizations in the Filipino community as well as One API in Nevada, who did food distribution to help other families who were suffering during the pandemic too. So we saw engagement in a lot of different ways when the pandemic hit us.
You know, what I love the most about you is that you're always keeping it 100 and always providing, this is the issue at hand, and this is what we're doing to combat this issue, and this is how we're going to continue empowering our communities. And I really love that a lot. So with that being said, I know that folks are blowing up our chat with just lovely comments about you. So can you tell us how folks back home can keep in touch with you all, and how they can keep in touch and attend your events?
Yes, best way to do that is we have a link tree, API Dems NV, and our social handles are all the same. Twitter at API Dems NV, and Instagram at API Dems NV. It's the place. If you click on our bio, there's a link to our link tree. We are constantly updating it with upcoming events, the work that we're doing. Yesterday, we just posted a thread on AANHPI mental health. Go ahead and read that too. Where we encourage everybody to join us as we continue to program throughout the month. We meet weekly. So we're constantly talking. And if you are interested in programming, or you just have creative ways of how we should continue to reach our community, expand the amount of AANHPIs who register as Democrats and engage in this election, then join us. We're a grassroots volunteer organization who just is here to maximize the participation of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders in the civic and the political process. And we care about making sure that these community members don't just vote, but they run for office too.
Thank you, friend. And folks back home, don't forget to check out their link tree. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the GOAT himself, because I am not sure he heard me make that joke earlier. So Eric Lester Jane, you are live at Grant Sawyer. So Eric is always working really hard for the community, and it's very present here as well. So Eric, how do you see the role of one APIA Nevada in advancing the interests and needs of the AANHPI community in the Silver State? And what are some of the key challenges and opportunities that you all are facing today, as well as the community? Tell us more.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you for letting me share space with three amazing Filipinas. Happy Asian Pacific American Heritage Month to all who celebrate, which is all of us. I really want to just ditto what Angeline said and what Assemblywoman Mosca said. And for us coming in right now, I moved to Nevada 5 years ago, more than 5 years ago, to help start the 501c4 One API Nevada, because we do believe there needs to be multiple roles in the network and kind of the way we do and make policy changes. So for One API Nevada as a 501c4, that means we are doing advocacy year round. We are doing organizing year round. We kind of bridge the space between a civic engagement 501c3, which my sister organization, Asian Community Development Council, is doing, but also making sure that there are strong leaders that we celebrate. For folks like Angeline leading the volunteer-driven caucus that has been amazing. The growth is amazing. The way they build power is amazing. The way they build leadership is amazing. And I really look up to the work they do. And also having the legislative caucus now seeing the members every year. There's more AANHPI members getting elected. So back in our role is to celebrate, to advocate, to organize, and do it in a way that we can always have a platform on municipal, on the local and state, on county and state level, and also on the federal level, that we kept advocating, but also holding our elected official accountable. And on the when during electoral times, making sure that we have the resources as independent expenditure to endorse those who support our community, who advocate for our values, and who that we want to see in office that represent the best of our policy and progress that I think Angeline and Assemblywoman Mosca already mentioned.
Thank you, Eric. And my next question to you is, in your opinion, what are some of the most pressing issues facing our communities in the Silver State today? And what are some ways that you all are advocating to solve these issues at the legislature? I know that you just provided testimony, so tell us about that.
Yeah, and this is if you'll go to our website, oneapinevada.org, APIA Nevada.org. You can see kind of our values. And it's probably when we were hungry when we wrote this, is we wrote it as CHEESE, CHEESE, but that includes like comprehensive immigration reform, health equity, education equity, economic justice, making sure climate and sustainability, and then also protecting the election, protecting our voting rights. That's not in order, but it's spelled out to be CHEESE, so we can make a lot of cheese puns and jokes. But also, because we do the year-round organizing, we're able to have field team and organizers having one-on-ones with community leaders and community advocates, but also knocking on doors in AANHPI households. We knock on voters' doors, and instead of asking them party or candidates, we ask them what issues they care for. We ask them what's on their mind. And 2018 and 2020, it's always in 2022, we saw that housing and economic justice hop to top three as well. So these are kind of the top issues that we know the community cares about. And, it's 12.5% of our population here, 3.1 million Nevadans, about 390 to 400,000 kind of identify as Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander. So for us, it's not a monolith. It's not the model minority. It's a very diverse racial and ethnic groups that we're trying our best to find the issues that kind of connect us all, that speak across the different experiences. But again, I think immigrant justice, health equity, education equity, protecting our voting rights, and then clean energy and environmental justice and economic justice. I think that's something that we know are on the top of minds for all APIs here in Nevada.
What a monster piece of advice that you're giving. I hope folks caught that. As soon as you said cheese clan, I had to do it. There we go. So I'd love to know what kind of pieces of wisdom would you gratefully share with young folks who are aspiring to engage in advocacy and community organizing? When I think of you, I think of Naruto runs to the pole. I think of goats I think of boba. I think that you all do an amazing task of engaging our young folks to become more vested into our topics that impact them on a day-to-day basis. So what are some pieces of advice that you would give to young folks who would like to champion issues of social justice and equity, environmental justice and whatnot?
I feel like when I was growing up, I feel like as a man in my mid-30s, I can say that now. There's always the expectation of when you're trying to speak to change, when in a very kind of traditional household that I was in, there's a lot of keep your head down and change things from the inside, or you can contribute to the causes when you can make money, when you're financially or successful, or you have your place in society, and then you can speak up. I know people have different ways of talking about it. This is definitely part of the model minority myth, but it's also this notion of we have to pay the immigrant tax. We have to be able to get through it and then be able to justify what we believe in. I think that was I'm glad to see that more and more young folks are kind of overcoming that. And for us to of time, our parents, our friends are to be.
I think we're losing you, Eric. I think Grant Sawyer's saying, "Oh,
how to second."
While Eric's looking for a new place to go hang out, I want
Is it better?
Oh, much better. There we go.
Oh yeah. So I just hop off Grant Sawyer. Government state-sponsored Wi-Fi is not as good as my data. Thank you, Angeline, for the heads up. So yeah, so I think a lot of it is the sacrifices that I always like to say the American dream voting bloc, which is children of immigrants or immigrants themselves. We feel like we have to honor their sacrifices. But I feel like the best way to do that is to speak up, to incorporate it as a lifestyle. Civic engagement or just getting involved should be a lifestyle. You should be able to pursue your passion. You should be able to do what you want to do and still being able to impact change, to still be able to lead changes. And that's why we have, like you said, baby goats for people's votes. We have K-pop cup sleeves event that's like BTS focused. We have petting zoos. We have puppies and boba. We have all these different things because that's what our community, or our organizers want to do themselves. And then you just bring it into your daily work. And I think that it's, instead of having a strict work-life balance, is making sure how when you work, you bring your true self, bring your authentic self in. And that's the best way to affect change, because that's a way that other people will see that you're having fun and doing something you really believe in. That's the best way for people to follow suit and continue to scale up, so you have that critical mass to really impact.
Thank you, Eric. And we're almost hitting to the top of the hour. So before we say aloha for good night, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to our speakers to give their final word and to tell you all how you all can connect with them. And I'm going to go in reverse order. So Eric, you're going to kick this off. Tell us how folks can get a hold of you all and how they can keep in touch with One APIA Nevada and your sister org, ACDC.
Check out our website. There's a lot of the stats, the issues, and also our videos for oneapinevada.org. Also find us on Twitter or on Facebook or on Instagram. Same thing with ACDC, with Asian Community Development Council. And again, we're always looking for volunteers and looking to find ways to build our community, find a way to gather, find a way to affect change.
Thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and end it with my friend, Angeline. Tell us what your last words are and tell us what you want to bring home.
Yeah, if you're a young person looking to get involved in politics, but also want to do it by having fun, join the AAPI Democratic Caucus. We are so excited to have you. I'm dropping our link tree in the chat with, again, links to tomorrow's event, Curry and Calligraphy, where you can join to eat curry and learn about calligraphy. Very straightforward. And then also become a member for API Dems. We're going to continue to do more education and cultural learning while we do it, while having fun, and a couple of karaoke sessions in between. So join us and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at API Dems.
Thank you to our amazing panel for joining us this evening, and thank you to the folks back home who are watching and asking all of your amazing questions. Before I leave you all for today, I just wanted to let you all know that if you're interested in sweaters, coasters, totes, you name it, t-shirts, we have it. If you didn't know, we do Battleborn Progress has some amazing merch, and I think you would look amazing in our merch. So be sure to check it out. Our friends back home are going to be dropping that link into the chat. And if you want to keep up with what we and our partners in our Coop are up to during NV Ledge, sign up for the feed. We'll also be dropping that in the chat as well. And ahoy ho until we all see each other again. With fondest aloha, good night, everybody. And I hope that you are staying safe and taking care of yourselves. Thank you for joining us tonight.